Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Planning Your Microsoft Dynamics GP Upgrade. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us today. There are a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin the presentation. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please either raise your hand so that we can unmute you, or you can submit them through the GoToWebinar question box. We will be answering questions throughout the presentation and will also be following up after the presentation to answer any additional questions. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We have Brian Murphy, who is a senior GP consultant here at Socius. So at this point, Brian, I believe we're ready to transition the presentation over to you.
All right, super, thank you. All right, well, welcome everyone. It's a little bit interesting trying to do a presentation and have no feedback at all, so you may find that I'm buzzing through this, and so I'll try to make this this very interesting topic as the best that I can. So anyway, so I'll give you a little bit of information here on the roadmap for GP. Most of you depending on what versions you're on, many of you may are probably on GP 2013 or higher. Maybe a few of you still below there. But anyway, so this little slide shows you a little bit about what's going on. So we had a GP 2013 R2 edition, then a 2015 R2, and if you'll notice the pattern here, and Microsoft has decided that they're going to get away from the big process of having lots and lots of updates, service packs through the year. Basically what they're going to do is generally, unless there is a need to do something different, they're generally going to have a major release, and then probably about 12 months later have an R2 release. Usually that R2 release is going to include both fixes and also new features. So a couple of major new features that have been coming in the last few years. One that I'll talk about a little bit later, anyone who might be using Business Portal. Business Portal, which used SharePoint Server, is no longer a product in our line. Instead, they have written that functionality into the base product using the new Dynamics GP web server. So if you're not using the GP web yet, that is also another new feature. Has now been out for several versions, so maybe something you want to consider. There might be one possible avenue to give us some of your users the ability to access Dynamics GP without installing on every single workstation. So something to consider. We tend not to oversell that functionality and tell people that while from a functionality standpoint it is a very good replacement for the full-featured client that you install on your workstation, from a performance standpoint it isn't always exactly the same depending on resources, internet connectivity, and that. So that would depend. So anyway, so you've seen a little bit about some of the things that are coming. We do expect that there will be a 2016 R2 at some point, probably late next year, in our, I would say late in the year, maybe third quarter. And then there are plans. Of course, GP is not going away. If you read all the information out on the internet, you've heard of the new branding of the products, the hosted or web solution that Microsoft is offering in the CRM or the 365 space. That is not a replacement for Dynamics GP. So Dynamics GP is not going away anytime soon, nor I mean probably For all intents and purposes, I don't expect to see it go away in my work lifetime. So I don't think it's something that many of our clients need to worry about unless you've gotten to the point where maybe you've just outgrown your Dynamics GP system, or you have features, you need additional features that aren't in this system. So that being said, I would not see many of our clients need to migrate to one of the newer technologies. So, all right. So, that being said, so why would we want to upgrade? Well, first of all, you guys know that Microsoft has a life cycle on their products because it's very difficult to support many different versions of products. Therefore, they tend, right now we're in one of those weird spots, but they tend to only support the current version and the previous version. Right now we're in a situation where 2016, 2015, and 2013 are still supported. That's a little bit unusual. I think based upon these dates, you'll see that they're going to get back on that approximately 2 version supported plan, okay? So the other reasons you might want to consider is that there are lots of new features and new functionality that are built into both GP 2015 and GP 2016. I talked earlier about the web client. That might be one thing you want to leverage. Microsoft has given us, because of the changes in the licensing model, they tend to give you more features that you may not have access to today, so without any change in your base price. So those could be reasons why you as a firm might want to consider upgrading so that you can leverage some of those new features. So, all right, things that we absolutely have to consider, you need to consider, and if you're doing this yourself, or what we would hope is that you will be working with us, is these are the things that we would want to consider together during that process. Things like downtime. When does this need to happen? Can this be done during the week because you have a slow period or a slower period, or does it have to happen on weekends? When you do a test upgrade, you're making a backup of your databases and restoring them to some test system. So that generally, or it should not involve downtime of your production environment. But when you go to do your production upgrade, there has to be a cutoff. There has to be a period of time when we're going to actually be performing that work. So there's going to be downtime, and you're going to need to schedule that. We would strongly recommend a test upgrade, and unless you're the absolute smallest of clients with just no customizations whatsoever, it is probably the cheapest insurance policy that you can purchase, because if you upgrade your accounting system and you're not ready to go live, it is costing your team time and money. And as we all know in business, that's time and money is everything. So that's one thing to consider. So you may not have upgraded in quite some time, 3-4 years, something like that. So something you may have to consider is it time to replace some hardware, be it physical or virtual, doesn't matter. But do we have to consider we need new servers, or do I need a new version of SQL? We'll see a little bit later that versions of SQL have changed as we go forward. So that would be some things that we really need to talk about. Other things we need to talk about, are you still using some functionality that is now obsolete because of new features? Do you not need to do that anymore? So these could be items that we want to talk through and see if there is a way for you to leverage the product better, and so that you're not wasting time and money for your company. Major thing to consider: third-party products. Some of you what are also called ISV products. So if you have other products that plug in or install into Dynamics GP, maybe McCormick's Micker or multi-entity management, or there's many of them. Most of you all have different ones. So, but the big thing that we have to always consider, we have to make sure that they are compatible with that version that we're installing into. Most of the greatest percentage of ISV partners are fully up to date and ready for GP 2016. But if you're working with a partner that's really small and maybe doesn't have the resources, those are absolutely the people to ask first, because they may not have the resources to be ready quite as quick as some of the larger vendors. So other things you also need to consider: do you have custom code? Has Socius or some other vendor written custom code for you, and then that custom code has to be rewritten or recompiled or tweaked to make sure that it works with that new version. Those are things that we absolutely, one more reason why we want to perform that test, because that's the best way we know to be able to make sure that it does or does not work. Also, many of you guys have integrations, so we'll probably want to test those integrations. Generally, when we go forward, the maturity of the Microsoft Dynamics GP product is such that we generally, table changes tend to be, rarely do we have tables go away. More often than not, we have new columns added to tables, we have new fields added. So generally your integrations are going to go forward and work. But that being said, every once in a while something has changed that might potentially impact your integration. So those are things we're going to have to test. Reporting. Microsoft Dynamics GP leverages, out of the box, leverages SQL Server reporting services, but do you have any custom SSRS reports? Or are you using Crystal or something else that we need to consider? And will those products need to be altered in any way to make sure that that reporting continues to function? Things to consider. And then always, we would like to help you out with training if you would like us to. There's one of the things we generally offer anytime we perform an upgrade. We like to show you kind of what's new in the product, and depending on how long your team or how large your team is, you may want us to show that to your team. And then as part of that discussion, a lot of times we start discussing, okay, well, you're not leveraging this, but could you? Is there the potential there for you to create savings, create new functionality that you're not leveraging today? So those are kind of things that we want to, all the things we want to consider during the planning process. And as I talked about earlier, this new feature of the web client, that may be something that you want to leverage. So the web client is pretty straightforward. It's not terribly difficult for us to implement. The biggest thing it does, it requires an SSL certificate. So, as long as you own a certificate, we can implement that. The beauty of using SSL is all of that traffic across the internet is sent in an encrypted fashion. So, all right, next slide. So, budget considerations, big deal, right? We have to be concerned about the budget. So, of course, you know, the point we want to make sure of is that you have in there a line item for us, so consulting services. Other things to consider could be potentially licensing, especially if you need to purchase a new version of SQL or if you need new versions of Windows, anything along that line. Or if your third-party product, maybe you are out of date and you need the new version, and so we would need to consider all of these items. As I talked about earlier, it's not uncommon, especially if you're only upgrading maybe every 3 to 4 years, it's not uncommon that you might need to go through the process of doing a hardware upgrade. Or if you're not doing a hardware upgrade because you're using virtual machines, it's very common now that we do less of the hardware upgrades, but more about moving to a new server, moving to a new virtual machine. So something to plan for. It's generally it's fairly minor work, but you know, if you have 2 databases, it's a really simple process, but if you have 200 databases, it's a little bit more work. Those kind of things that we have to discuss in our planning so that we can build into our budget. And then often, many of you, depending on what version of Great Plains you're coming from, you very likely will be going to a new version of SQL. So that'll be something to consider. And then if you do have any customizations, if there are customizations that require any sort of rewrite, that'll be something that we need to build into our budget. And then if throughout this product or project you uncover or you know of something that you want to achieve after the upgrade, maybe there's post-upgrade projects that we want to go through, but the first milestone is getting the upgrade done so that we can do those next steps. So, all right, all about hardware planning. So, you know, is now a good time to upgrade my server? Well, I'm a hardware guy, so yeah, it's always a good time to upgrade my server. We always want the biggest and the baddest. So yes, go out and spend money. So should I upgrade SQL Server? That'll be a big point. And one of the later slides I have, you'll see exactly which versions of SQL are supported in GP 2015 and GP 2016. So are you leveraging Terminal Server or Citrix Server, or do you have all local workstation installations? So things to consider. And if it's time to do a hardware refresh on something, might it be a time to consider, okay, well, instead of installing Great Plains on 25 workstations, do we want to instead install it on 2 terminal servers or 2 Citrix servers so that on the next upgrade, instead of having 25 client installs, we only have 2 client installs? All things to consider. And then the new feature now, the web server for the web client, so which leverages Microsoft's IIS or Internet Information Services. So items that we need to consider as far as planning for our hardware. Okay. All right, I spoke earlier, I said Business Portal, because I don't know how many of you have Business Portal, probably not a large number, but Business Portal offered several different features. Internally at Socius, we use the time and expense modules, and that is a feature in Business Portal. So GP 2013 is the last version that supports Business Portal. So if you're going to upgrade to GP 2015 or GP 2016, you're going to be migrating off of that, depending on which feature you use. So those are all things that we would want to have serious discussions around going forward. So the so these are the the HR features, the paid time, the advanced HR, requisition management, those are now built into the core product, and if you want to leverage those, for the most part, that is people access that now through the web client. So, and that is the new design feature of how that is going to go forward. So you're going to see the web client be leveraged more and more, and it seems to be meeting our clients' needs. So now, big point down here at the bottom is that if you perform a migration, some of the setups that you would have done way back when you set up Business Portal, we'll have to go through configuration, because most of that, the data of course is there, but the setting configuration does not come forward. So we'll have to plan for all that. All right, so here's a biggie for some of you. Most people probably don't have Windows 7 anymore. But even if you do, notice that GP 2015 and GP 2016 both support Windows 7, 8, and 10. All right, so biggie. So probably means from a workstation standpoint, generally 99% of you are all perfectly fine and probably don't need to worry about the client operating systems. Now, server operating systems, still good. GP 2016, support on 5 different OSs. So if you're going to GP 2015, notice that it won't be supported on Windows 2016. I don't think there's much more to be said about that. All right, next one. This one is a big deal for many people. What version of SQL is supported in connection to your version of Dynamics GP? Notice GP 2016 is supported on SQL 2012, SQL 2014, and SQL 2016. So if you are still back on GP 2010, and so if we were going from 2010 all the way to 2016, the rule of thumb with Dynamics GP is we can only skip one version of product during the upgrade process. So we would either upgrade from 2010 to 2013 and then to 2016, or we could upgrade from 2010 to 2015 and then to 2016. Ultimately, it amounts to the same, but what could come into play, and the reason why you kind of think some of these things through, could be because of the versions of SQL you have available to you. So those are just kind of things that we have to think about as we're going through our planning considerations. Okay. Next topic could be an issue for some folks. This is what Office version are supported. So notice with GP 2016, Dynamics GP 2016, notice that Office 2013 is the lowest supported version. So that being said, generally will most features work in conjunction with older versions of Office? Yes. However, if what's driving you forward is some of the new features, the features of being able to email directly with connections to Dynamics GP, leveraging some of that features, then for those things to fully work, you will have to be on supported versions of Office. 2015, the R2, well, both versions of 2015 did support Office 2010 and higher. All right. So what's not supported with GP 2016? Well, 2 things that most of you probably don't worry about anymore. You probably haven't talked about Windows XP or Vista. Many of you hopefully never talked about Vista, but that is no longer in play. Server 2003 is not in play, and SQL Server 2008. I talked earlier the version of Office, so Office 2010, also Internet Explorer 10. I talked about Business Portal. Acrobat version 9 is not supported, so you have to be above version 9. And I don't know how many of you are still on FRX, but FRX is not supported with GP 2013, I think GP 2013, 2015, or 2016, although there are some people out there that have created some There are some workarounds, although I will tell you, and we have seen this on repeated, on multiple times, that the workarounds are not foolproof, and so we would not recommend that you try to remain on FRX. We would strongly recommend that you consider moving forward to Management Reporter or looking at some other financial reporting tool to pull your financial data out of Dynamics GP. So, okay. So some of the steps that we always go through when we're preparing to do a Dynamics GP upgrade, and it doesn't matter whether we're doing this in a test upgrade or the production upgrade, it just doesn't matter. So Microsoft's pretty good. The beauty of working with a big vendor like this is they are pretty good at creating documentation for us, and so they do give us some very good upgrade documents that give us some information on how we need to proceed, what we need to do to prepare our GP company data. Some of the biggest things is probably one of the biggest things that I feel is of utmost thing to do is to run check links. Many of you probably do not run check links on a very regularly, because it's can be time consuming and no one can be in the system when you're doing it. So therefore, because it's not often run regularly, we will take this opportunity when we're doing our upgrade to do that. And I'll explain a little bit later about what check links actually does within the database, but it is very important from validating your data. So an item that could be wise, removing unused companies. If you have unused companies in the system, and if you have 4 companies in the system, one of them hasn't been used in a while, and in your environment, you know, they're reasonably small, and it only takes 20 minutes to upgrade the database, it doesn't matter. But if you have 200 companies and it takes an hour per company to run the upgrade, then we definitely want to think about, do we need to continue to carry this company forward? Is it beyond our reporting requirements for IRS, or is it just a test company? So those are the kinds of things you might want to think about. I'm not advocating that you just go and just delete companies, but I do want you to consider of why it might be wise to get rid of a company if it's a test company, and if it's really, really large, if it takes 2 or 3 hours to upgrade it, might it be smarter to delete that test company and then recreate it after the upgrade? Just something to consider. So other things, preparing the test environment. A lot of times we're going to put that burden on your IT group, be that internal or external resources, but that's one thing that we will have to consider. And then especially in our production upgrade, we'll have to plan for downtime. I talked earlier about updating and testing your custom code. Don't think I need to say much more about that. And if anyone is still using FRX, there are a number of procedures that we will go through as we assist you in migrating from FRX to Management Reporter. There are some blank rows that have to be removed, and a few other items. So one of our application consultants would work with you to do a little housekeeping before we would perform that migration. And then one of the things that we would normally do is we will get those registration keys for you from Microsoft or from your third-party providers, and we will get those and enter those in as part of that process. So as far as pre-upgrade reports, we ask that you, especially on that production upgrade, we're going to ask that we'll provide a list of pre-upgrade reports to you and ask that you run those both before and after and do some comparisons to make sure that the data matches. And makes sense, I'm sure. What I probably wouldn't do is I probably wouldn't print them out to paper. I'd probably print them out to a PDF or a text file. But also during that process, when we're performing the test upgrade, we're also going to run some detailed trial balance reports and ensure that the before and the after numbers match. And so we're going to have a good idea before we hand the data back over to you. We're going to know whether the update is completely successful. Otherwise, we're not going to hand it back to you. So, all right. So I talked earlier about other companies that need to be removed. That's enough said there. This is another item that Microsoft strongly recommends that we do. Before you upgrade, you should post, delete, or print all single-use batches, not recurring batches, single use only. I don't generally worry about this when we're doing a test upgrade, but we do want this done before we do the production upgrade. Now, because they're in the system, I'm going to make an assumption you probably can't post them because they're probably not ready to be posted. And I assume because they're in the system, we don't want to delete them. So usually the answer is to print them to a PDF so that we can recreate them if at any chance that they would get corrupted during the upgrade process. That being said, I haven't seen an instance of these getting corrupted in probably 5 or 6 years. So it is not a high rate of occurrence, but maybe it doesn't happen because I get everyone to print them and we just play it safe. I don't know the answer, but I do know that it doesn't happen very often. But I would still always play it safe. Okay, so you should always make at least one complete backup of your databases before upgrading. Depending on where those servers are with your and how much data space there is, I can tell you we're going to make as many database backups as we feel that we need to, so that if anything would happen, we can roll back. So we accept that responsibility and understand that that is critical. This data is critical to your business, and so we are most definitely going to be prepared from that standpoint. We're also going to ask above and beyond. We're generally going to ask your IT folks to also do some backups. So, all right. And I talked earlier about printing comparison reports. All right, running check links. I don't know how often any of you guys do these today. Some organizations decide that they want to do this on a regular basis, quarterly, mid-year, once a year, whatever it is. That being said, check links actually can make changes to the data. So when you do this, you need to know what you're doing. You need to make backups before anytime before you run check links, because there is the potential that it can actually remove data or insert new data. So as it says here, it analyzes the relationships between the different files to find data that exists in one but not in another. So it is trying to, in this logical file system, it is trying to make sure that everything that should be on the left side is also on the right side. One of the nice things that it does do is at the end, it does give you a report, which you can then print out. And so when that is done, I always look through that report and get a rough idea of what it has done. Now, if all it did was insert, it was missing an address record or something like that, no big deal. But if it says, oh, it inserted some sort of financial entry, well, then we need to understand a little bit more about what it did and research that. Okay. As I said earlier, what do? We do lots and lots of backups. So makes perfect sense. trying to make sure we're going to back up both the databases and all of the accompanying software that goes with it. So, Integration Manager, for those who use Integration Manager, that has a database. We're going to back up that database. GP, the GP client, because it has all these, has the settings in there. We're going to back those kinds of things up. So we're just going to, we will play it safe because that is what we do. And one of the things I will tell you is, Socius as a reseller, as a partner with Microsoft, we follow their best practices. We follow it very, very closely. And the reason we do that is we know that if we follow this procedure, the likelihood of problems is reduced. Doesn't mean we can't plan for everything. Things happen. Data issues occur. We can't plan for it all. But we do know that if we follow a specific procedure every single time we do this, that the likelihood of problems is greatly reduced. I will tell you, I perform anywhere between 30 and 50 upgrades every single year and have done so for the last 10 years or so. We, unlike the guys in your IT group who, they know how to maintain your Exchange servers and everything else, you're not going to come to me for Exchange anymore. Similarly, you probably don't want to rely on the guy who does a Great Plains upgrade once every 3 years or 4 years. We have most definitely learned a lot of things, and we also have that phone call that we can make to Microsoft. So that's what we bring to the table. All right. So this slide, in this day and age, because we go on site less and less, the title might be a little misleading. So what do we do when either on site or we're working remotely? It doesn't matter which anymore. Things that we have to do, possibly we have to apply a service pack to an existing version before we can even go to the, go to that next major step of applying the full next build and perform an upgrade. There's most definitely going to be update to the data. If you have third-party products, there's definitely going to be install and potentially upgrade to their data. Things we talked about, custom code, so you very likely have some custom code that might need to be looked at and reviewed. Almost all of our clients have custom forms and reports, forms and or reports in their Great Plains environment. So one of the things that we have to do is before we perform that upgrade, we're going to export those, and then we'll create brand new forms and reports dictionaries after the update. We know that if we do it that way versus the old way of actually attempting to update those forms and reports, we know that with 99% certainty it's just going to go cleanly versus the upgrade process is just full of hiccups. So other things we might need to consider, the FRX to management reporter migration or migration to some other financial reporting tool. So, or if you already have management reporter, do we need to update it? There are new updates released about every 60 days, 60 to 90 days for management reporter. So might that need to be done? And then if you are moving to new servers, many of your environments, we have shared files. Excuse me. We have shared files that we need to potentially move and repoint for all of your clients. And then something else we prefer to do is to set up a database maintenance plan. Many IT groups don't have people internally that have great experience with SQL Server, and many of our, especially our consultants that are doing our upgrades, that's pretty much where we spend our day. We spend our day playing with SQL Server. And so we set up database maintenance plans that make sense for the Dynamics GP environment. And then it's actually possible now where you can have set up SQL to email alerts if it has issues. So those are the kind of things we want to set up for you so that you can be a little proactive on your end. All right. So some of the things that you as a group, as an accounting group, are probably going to do after the upgrade, both after a test upgrade and after a production upgrade before you go live. You're going to print those post-upgrade reports, and you're going to compare and make sure that they match. And if they don't, you're going to raise your hand and yell and scream, because we're not going forward until they match, or figure out why they don't match, because they should. We're going to test that custom code if you have some. If you have custom reports, we're going to need to make sure all those things work. You're going to need to test your integrations, because there's nothing worse. I mean, we want to conduct the majority of this testing after the test upgrade when no one's breathing down our necks. We don't want that to happen after the fact, when everyone's staring at us and no one's able to work. So it really, really is important to do real user testing after that test upgrade, because that's really the most successful upgrades. That's where that's the difference maker, is when people perform the proper procedures after the test upgrade. All right, rolling out to users. By that point, if the data is good and everything, this is the easy part. But if you have 25 workstations, it could be quite an effort. If you only have 2 workstations or 2 terminal servers, this probably doesn't take very much time at all. So workstation updates are something to plan for. Do you want us to do what's new training? So if you do, we'll work with you and decide if it makes sense to do that after the test upgrade, or if you want to do that after the production upgrade, right before we hand off to you and you go live. That depends. So totally up to you. All right. So post-upgrade projects. And some of these may not even be post-upgrade. So, one of the things I talked about earlier is that you have the potential here for changes in systems because of new features, changed functionality within the system. So might want to talk through that and see how you can leverage these new features that are now available to you. That might present itself with increased efficiency. We hope so. Might you need to consider security audits? More and more people have to be concerned about security, and so there are the potentials. There are several third-party products especially that really help in the security realm of Dynamics GP. Things to consider. Do we need to do implementing new features? And new features might be during the upgrade process, or they might be post-upgrade projects. Totally depends upon you, your team, and what these features are. So we would work with you, the application consultant and one of the technical consultants would work with you, and depending on what you think is best is what we would do. So, or similarly, are there any new modules that during the upgrade process we need to make sure that we install so that they're there so that you can leverage them? And then, of course, I've talked plenty about upgrading from FRX or migrating from FRX to Management Reporter. So, all right. So if you haven't seen these documents or these pages out on Customer Source, here's a couple of good links that you would want to consider. So the first one is for the GP 2016 system requirements. I've shown you a lot of things that are supported, but this page gives you a lot more information, a lot more specific information, especially if considering the strength of your SQL server and depending on how much data you have, how large, what type of hard drive architecture you might want to put in, number of processors, and those kinds of topics. Okay, and then there's also an upgrading a hot topic page. Right now, there's nothing terribly huge on there, but if you, for example, here's one of the topics that's on there, is that if you leverage a feature called OLE Notes, not a lot of clients used it in the past, but if you did, that functionality has been turned off. OLE Notes are no longer supported in GP 2016. There's a migration path. The migration path has to happen before you get to GP 2016. There is no migration utility in GP 2016, so we have to do it in either GP 2013 or GP 2015. So that's a hot topic, but it's only a hot topic if you leverage that product or leverage that feature, but it's something to consider. When we sit down with you and kind of go through the help understand the process and talk what we call a pre-upgrade meeting, these are the kinds of questions we're always going to ask because we want to know, are there things that we need to make sure that we are going to do that will be a stumbling block and will cause this project to fail. So we're going to ask those questions. So, all right. Anyway, so that is all of my information. So next up, I'm back to Lindsay.
All right, so a couple things before we answer the questions that came in. Our next webinar is February 7th from 1 to 2, and it's on when it's time to upgrade to Microsoft Dynamics GP. And then the rest of our GP schedule for the year is on our website, socius1.com. So you can look there for the different webinars that we'll have throughout the year. All right, so a couple questions that came in. The first one is, we still use Business Portal. Does the GP Web Services have the capability to create purchase requests, check pay stub, check W-2s, etc.? We heavily use these features and haven't got a clear answer on if the web client can do these.
Okay, and I would not be the right person to answer that, so I would suggest you go directly, reach out directly to your account manager and your main application consultant and have them do the research on that, because I know that many of those features are definitely there, but are all of those there? I would not be the person to answer that question for you. So I would suggest you reach out directly to them and force them to get you that information.
All right, and then the next question, have they included more functionality into the web version with more recent versions? We upgraded to 2015 but can't use the web versions because of limitations. For example, Integration Manager doesn't work with the web versions.
Well, I'm not sure. So for all intents and purposes, all features of the Dynamics GP full-featured client are now within the web client. The only, now sometimes third-party products, for example, McCorma's Micker does not work, and it doesn't sound like it will ever work because they've made a decision that that's a security concern. So that doesn't work. But Integration Manager does not work through the, I don't believe it will ever have, I don't believe it'll ever work directly through the web client. So, but other than that, with the exception of Integration Manager, for the most part, most people would consider them an apple to an apple.
All right, and that is all the questions that are in so far. Since we are a few minutes early, we'll stay on the line. If anybody does have any more questions, feel free to put them in the question box. And if not, everyone have a great day.
Thank you all.